name is Emily Goodall with the World Benchmarking Alliance, and delighted to be here with you today at the Spain National Advisory Board as part of the opening plenary in your annual event, looking at the role of the financial system post-COVID in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We sit at an extraordinary moment in time. On the one hand, we have sustainable finance having its moment in the sun, with unprecedented capital inflows to sustainable finance products. On the other hand, the latest UN Sustainable Development Goals progress report indicates that they are sliding further from reach from 2030. We see rising inequality, we see GHG emissions bouncing back despite the pandemic, and the delicate planetary ecosystem on which we all rely is under threat. So in the light of this, many are questioning what contribution the financial system to people and planet. And in this session, in this panel that I'm delighted to welcome three incredibly influential figures from the world of finance to discuss, we're looking at a new roadmap for capitalism. So my first question is to you, Larry, a big question. What is your vision for capitalism for the next 5 to 10 years?
Hi everyone, and it's good to be part of this panel. I'm very bullish on capitalism. Let me just start there. And I do believe that capitalism is working, maybe slowly, and there's a lot of inequalities as you suggested, but when you think about just the success of the vaccination, that we were able to create a vaccination actually in 3 days from the time the DNA was sent out to the world from China. It took a U.S. company 3 days to come over the mRNA. And then it took 8 months to test it and make sure that it was effective and efficient, and then months and months in terms of the distribution. But prior to that, it took 4 years for any vaccination. So this is an example of technology and capitalism. And so when the world comes together, we do solve solutions. And I could use that metaphor. I do believe that metaphor is apropos for sustainability, that capitalism is understanding that climate risk is investment risk. And we are seeing a profound change by many, many leaders in business. We're not seeing a profound change in all of society. There lies some fundamental issues. But the question of where capitalism will be in 10 years, I think innovation is from capitalism. Entrepreneurship is a form of capitalism, and I do believe that will carry much of the great successes. The issue we have in the world today, though, is we need to blend that form of capitalism and the whole need of society, making sure it represents all of society. And that's the fundamental issues right now. One of the big things that I see related to capitalism today, or success, scale and companies that are truly believers in stakeholderism. These companies are getting larger and larger and larger. Clients are using more share of their wallet to these companies. And in every industry that we are witnessing, the better are getting better and the worse are getting worse. And if you think about our own preferences, how we consume today, we're consuming with fewer companies, we're living with items from fewer different organizations, and this is happening worldwide. And this is the issue that we have. We have this truly uneven component in society now, and that's going to be the big issue. We are building great companies worldwide that are doing more and more for their clients. At the same time, we're seeing it's harder and harder for small companies to compete in that environment. And the key is obviously jobs, and jobs that are just and fair, and that's going to be the big issue. But if from the lens of what I see in America right now, we had companies now announce a significant raise in minimum wages. You're starting to see that. This is about conscious capitalism. This is about stakeholder capitalism. And I do believe we're seeing more and more of society asking more and more to companies. The unevenness, though, is we're asking only public companies to do these changes. We're not asking private companies. when it gets to climate change and climate risk, are we only going to ask public companies to make these changes to report under, let's say, TCFD, or are we going to ask all of society? These are some of the objectives that I worry about. And I worry about that the unevenness is because we're only asking segments of society to make the changes, not all.
Thank you, Larry. So we heard about the importance of both private and public there. Gonzalo Cortázar, I'd like to come to you now with a similar question on your vision for capitalism in 5 to 10 years. Maybe you can speak also to that public and private dimension.
Well, thank you, Emily, and well, I'm happy to hear Larry's optimistic view, which I share. I think we are going to have a form of capitalism for hopefully a long time. It's proved itself as a good system, or if you want to see the glass half empty, at least the least bad of the economic systems we've seen. Certainly, we have to learn from alternatives that have not worked in the past. No, but I do think that it needs to change and adapt. And in a way, this is what Larry is mentioning when we talk about a stakeholder capitalism. This is fundamental. If capitalism does not change, we are going to end up with a different planet, a planet that we do not like. And because in the past, capitalism has not included this dimension. We've been good at maximizing profits, maybe minimizing risk when we can, but we thought that there was out there some sort of infinite natural resource that cannot be depleted. And the reality is now we know, and it's pretty obvious, that it is being depleted. We need to incorporate that into the equation to make sure that capitalism survives. No? I'm optimistic because clearly the agenda is completely different now. The priorities that CEOs globally have, sort of ESG, over the last 3 days I have had at least 4 different discussions around ESG in various forms. No? It looks, and we are in the middle of integrating a big organization, in the middle of a domestic merger. So to think that even while we have so many other things, this is still so important, it means a lot. So I think priorities, the agenda, obviously financial markets have evolved. The ESG investment is really something extraordinary when you look at where we were 5, 10 years ago. But we also need to be conscious that actual behaviors have not changed that much. You were saying it at the beginning, that we are not making that much progress on SDGs. No? So we need to make sure that we acknowledge this is a long-term process, and we need to actually step up and convert into actions what we're doing. Capitalism has had a problem in terms of climate change, damage to the environment. It has another problem, I think, historically, which is social inequality. It's pretty obvious that we have not made a lot of progress on this one, and while damage to the environment is someone where everyone is at stake, because everyone realizes that we cannot live in a planet that is not right, does not have the right conditions to live. However, inequality is only a problem for the ones that are less equal. And I am a bit concerned that in the next 5 to 10 years we're going to make a lot of progress on E, and that's positive. When I say I'm concerned, not because we make a lot of progress on the E of the ESG, but we were not likely to make so much progress on the social part, which is something that I think it still needs to be addressed and put the right emphasis on.
Thank you. And maybe then to turn to Sir Ronald Cohen, running as chair of the Global Steering Group on Impact Investing. Interested to understand your perspective on the specific role of impact investing in that vision that we've just heard from Larry and Gonzalo.
So Emily, let me say how great a pleasure it is to be here with you and with Larry and with Gonzalo to talk about this. I see 3 major forces coming together, which are similar to the forces which came at the birth of the technology revolution. When I got into business in my mid-20s in 1972, the average portfolio had 2 securities, the bonds and the shares of your country. And the measurement of risk 20 years before began to influence thinking. The concept of risk-adjusted returns came into play. Diversification came. It opened the door to the inclusion of venture capital and private equity and later hedge funds into portfolios. It opened the door to emerging markets. It, in that sense, helped to fund both the tech revolution and globalization. I feel we are in a similar place today, but with one major additional force. We have the force of technology. Technology is driving forward in leaps and bounds. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, augmented reality, the use of computing in the genome, all of these things are enabling humanity to deliver impact, positive impact, in ways we could never have contemplated. But at the same time, there is a huge change in values. The values of young people kicked this off. They didn't want to buy the products of companies that were creating environmental or social harm. They didn't want to work for those companies. And then investors became aware of it. And over the last decade, we've seen ESG go from virtually nothing to $40 to $70 trillion today, if depending on the source that you consult. So that is a second major force. But the third major force, which is reshaping capitalism, in my humble opinion, is transparency on the impacts created by companies. Because the ability of our generation to use computing power to measure the impacts of companies and translate them into dollar terms, that is going to change the rules of the game for investors and for business. So an effort that I'm proud to chair at Harvard Business School, the Impact Weighted Accounts Initiative, which Gonzalo and I have chatted about before, is showing that ESG impact accounting is totally feasible. We can look at thousands of companies and we can see that in the case of their operational impact, out of 1,800, 250 are delivering more damage in dollar terms than they're making in profit. We can see a correlation between the companies that are polluting more and lower stock market valuations relative to their competitors. That's the force which is changing capitalism. And so in that sense, Emily, by bringing this impact accounting transparency to ESG, we turn it into impact investment, because the definition of impact investment is to unite the intention to create impact with the measurement of the impact created.
Thank you. So accountants may yet save the world if we can incorporate this vision. So I wanted to come back to something that you really touched on, Gonzalo, there, which is around the twin challenges of the environmental burdens that we face and leading to live within those planetary boundaries, and then social inequality, which we also heard very clearly, I think, there from Larry as well. There's also the interplay between the two, and the challenge of how to affect that decarbonisation of the economy at the rapid rate that we need to, if we're going to meet the Paris Agreement, and bring workers and communities with us along the way, keep down poverty, ensure there's no energy poverty, there's job creation, as you were just alluding to. So interested in that interplay between the two, maybe bringing us a bit more near term than the 5 to 10 years. So if we look 2 to 3 years out, what do you see, and I'll come to you again, Gonzalo, therefore, what do you see as the near-term opportunity for the financial system in contributing to a just transition, as it's called, in that social inclusion challenge that we face?
Well, the good news is that it's a very big opportunity, certainly, and I'm going to focus especially on banks, as we run a broad organization with asset management and insurance, but other people much more qualified than I on this call to discuss that. But as a bank, everybody knows we tend to be at the center of the economy. We're, the circulatory system. We channel funds through lending into productive investments, hopefully productive investments. Now, in order to accelerate this transition, it's obvious that we can play a pivotal role. And I think everyone is understood this now, both outside the banking system and inside the banking system. And I also think it's a good thing. I think it's the right thing for banks to do, and it provides us with an opportunity to show to the society in general that we are good citizens. But there's a lot of responsibility also on us. what we can do and what we're doing as we speak, certainly I think all banks I know in continental Europe, where I have more dialogues with, is we have to look at our lending portfolio, decide which of that is brown, green, and maybe neutral. That's not easy, and it's all discussions about taxonomy, etc., that are very important, and there's different views, different banks, different countries on what is one thing or the other. We need to agree on that. But we have a look at what we have, then we need to establish a target. Where do we want to be? We have recently signed a large group of banks, over 40 banks, the Net Zero Banking Alliance a few weeks ago. We're putting a sort of long-term target, 2050 net zero. Obviously, we're net zero as a bank on scope 1 and 2, but we're looking at scope 3, what is the impact of our lending on CO2, and then decide how do we get there, no? And at what speed. We cannot leave everything for 2049, obviously. That means we are changing our credit policies, we're changing our credit decisions, and we need to set a path, communicate it, and actually deliver on that front. And this is not just about well, let's say I'm not going to lend to fossil fuels, companies operating today, I'm going to lend only to renewables. Actually, there are a lot of great companies that may be in the oil industry now that are actually very committed to do this transition. And hence, we can also get to be net zero by keeping clients where we incentivize them through innovative financial structures to make sure that they comply with targets or even exceed those targets that are sort of KPIs related to sustainability. No? And that is, I think, that is already obviously quite apparent, but I think very important. And then we need one critical help, which is from the public sector, at least in two ways. One is they can really act as a catalyst to private sector money. And one example is the Next Generation EU funds. In Spain, we're supposed to receive, or we're going to receive, up to 140 billion, which is a lot of money for Spain, 11% or so of GDP. A large share of this is going to the energy transition. Now, private banks can obviously have a multiplier effect on this money that is coming from, in this case, from the EU, to make sure that the impact is actually much larger. So developing the kind of blended financial structures that we can do together with the public sector, and why not with philanthropists, working all together is, I think, something that is very important. And finally, just one brief word. Ronnie was talking about metrics and impact. This is absolutely critical. All financial institutions are going to be claiming they're doing the right thing from an ESG point of view. We need to make sure that actually we have a consistent, not just metric and disclosure, but a consistent standard, and obviously appropriate supervision of these standards, so that banks can really compare what they are doing between each other, and society can really judge on that effort.
Thank you. And I'll turn then to Larry, maybe more from the asset management perspective, if you could speak to that. In understanding the vision that you outlined, BlackRock has made some big commitments in relation to climate, but wondering in relation to the just transition and social inclusion challenges that we're facing, what do you see as the contribution of asset management industry in the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, I think the asset management industry is as important as ever in terms of this transition. The asset management industry is in the nexus between the owners of capital and the corporations that are running the world. And we have to play that role in terms of the education of the owners of the capital and trying to help them design portfolios and help them understand why, let's say, climate risk is investment risk, but importantly also, how do we move forward related to transition? So we are trying to tell the asset owners, transition is not a risk, transition is an opportunity. And so we have to be working with them and where to put their capital, what are the opportunities. At the same time, we play this really important role in representing these asset owners in terms of how we vote, and how we vote on behalf as a fiduciary of the asset owners. And what I try to remind everybody, it's not our money. We have to be a fiduciary to the owners of capital. And then, so we have to then be working with all the corporations that we own on behalf of the asset owners, and then moving, plotting, helping all the corporations to move forward. And it's a very delicate task. I don't want to suggest it's easy. 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, and many things, but it's a process. And the beauty of finance, and this is something in Ronnie's career, my career, Gonzalo's career, one of the most beautiful things about finance is when finance understands a problem, we bring that problem forward. And what we are seeing now in the global capital markets, that problem is believed throughout the capital markets today. And we're seeing the asset owners moving more capital, as you framed the original question. The capital is being moved more into more sustainable types of products and investments. And I would just tell you, in the last 15, 16 months, we have seen a dramatic transformation from management teams and their boards in terms of how they're moving forward. And so the asset owners is playing that really pivotal role in trying to move both sides. We don't do it perfectly. I can tell you, my firm doesn't do it perfectly. BlackRock doesn't do it perfectly. We try to move forward. We try to push the companies forward on this, and we try to educate. The companies. Let me be clear, though, because of the fiduciary standard rule that we have to live under in the United States, we are investing as capitalists. We can't invest as environmentalists. I personally am an environmentalist, but that doesn't matter. And the fiduciary standard rule says you must maximize return. That is the only standard of being a fiduciary, the maximization of return. We believe that climate risk is investment risk, and we're spending huge sums of time, capital, people to build analytic and data to analyze, climate risks, transition risk, and so we could model that at every company. Now, Gonzalo talked about this. We need a global taxonomy, that we could judge every company, that we could measure each company properly. And that is going to be the big issue. I hope out of the COP26, it's coming this fall in Glasgow, I hope that is going to be one of the major accomplishments of the world, agreeing on a taxonomy, that we could judge an Asian company to a US company to a European company and with the same metrics, and we could see how this is moving. And that's going to be critical. Right now we don't, and I'm telling you, at this moment, just at this time, we are seeing a lot of fighting between Europeans and Americans right now. What standard to use, how to use it, what's better, and right now BlackRock's in the crossfire of all this standard stuff. But I need to say one more thing, though. So everything we're talking about, though, is really for public companies. Now, Gonzalo talked about the bank's loan portfolio and a lot of its private companies. And he mentioned Scope 2 and Scope 3 related to TCFD. The problem is, I do not believe it's going to work if they're going to ask Bank X and Asset Manager Y to be the watchdog of all the private companies. I could see the politicians screaming at us that we're demanding companies to move forward. And, we're trying to move this, but we may be hurting this one company. This is where it requires governmental and social and society's response. If we're only going to ask public companies to make this change, we'll never get to a net zero world. It has to be government working with all sectors of society. It can't just be public companies and private equity could do it elsewhere. We've seen in Europe many hydrocarbon companies sell some of their worst hydrocarbons to private equity firms. The world's net zero doesn't change. That one public company looks good. It looks much better. So the question is, we have to ask society, do we really want to get to a net zero, or do we want just public companies to be net zero? And that is not answered properly. Right now, it's a lot of theatrics, to be blunt. I don't see long-termism coming from any governments related to this, but they're doing the easy thing of public companies. And the last thing is, you framed the question related to just transition. If we do not have strong long-term government policy, we can never get to a just transition. Because this transition is going to move jobs out of some industries into other ones. The problem is it may be timing differences, and more importantly, it may be from one region to another region, one country to another country, and there lies the fundamental problems. Politicians can't live with that uncertainty. And so there lies some of the big issues we have to really address right now. And then we have not spoken about the emerging world. The emerging world's in deep trouble. I want to talk about a global just transition. The only way we're going to get to the emerging world to have a transition is to bring down the green premium of what the transition costs. They can't afford to pay a 20, 40, 50, 70% premium to be green. Their economy can't support that. And so it took 30 years to bring the cost of wind and solar to the cost of coal. We don't have 30 years. And so and this is the opportunity. That's why I said transition is an opportunity. Just like what happened with the vaccination. We digitized vaccination through DNA coding. We went from analog a year ago in vaccinations to digital. So we could do it. But we have to invest large sums of money to come up with green hydrogen. Green, cement and steel represents over 10% of the carbon footprint. And they're that's a lot. They're huge polluters that create those items to build. Agriculture creates 18% of the carbon footprint. So we're all spending a lot of time focusing on electric cars. We're spending a lot of time on wind and solar. The reality is, as Gonzalo knows, to invest in wind and solar today, the returns are almost like at government bonds today because so much capital is moving into this one area. And so what we need to be doing is focusing on how to invest in new technologies, to bring the green premium down, to get the whole world to move forward, and to make it a just transition, not just in any specific country, but if we are globalists, which I am, we better need to find a way to make it a just transition for the entire world.
Couldn't agree more there. Thank you, Larry. And you've set up a number of points there that I think point quite nicely to Ronnie for you to come in. I think both in the role of, we've mentioned already, chair of the Global Steering Group for Impact Investing, which at its heart is around collaboration. We've talked about the role, we've heard the role of public sector and of regulation here. Haven't heard so much yet of the role for civil society. So interested to understand your perspective really on the importance, what does the financial system need, and the importance of bringing in other players for that vision in the near term. And I might also ask you, Ronnie, if you may, to just reflect on, you mentioned already your nearly 50 years in the alternatives, private equity, venture capital space, some of the challenges perhaps that Larry has laid down there in increasing regulation for public companies and what that might mean. So if you're able to speak to both, that would be
Sure.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ronnie.
Sure, Emily. First of all, though, let me just look at the broad picture and agree totally with what Gonzalo and Larry have said about the transparency on impact and the need for government now to establish, as we did in the 30s, generally accepted impact principles according to which companies will prepare impact-weighted accounts. It's possible to do and the evidence is there to show it. The effort at Harvard has already covered a couple of thousand companies' operational impact, 3,000 companies' employment impact is about to be published, and then several hundred companies' product impact, all of them in dollar terms, are about to be published. So it can be done. Now, if it took us 4 years after the crash of 1929 to get to the securities regulation that introduced GAAP and accounting, surely in our day and age we can do that at a similar speed. That would suggest that within the next 3 years or so, governments will come to mandate the publication by companies of impact-weighted accounts. It will take us some time to establish these accounting principles, but time is short, as Larry was saying. And we don't have the luxury of perfecting a system. We have to start with a system that can deliver already the ability to discriminate between companies which are doing a good job of optimizing risk, return and impact, as I would put it, and those that are not. We need government to step in, because if we want to get to a single set of global principles without the schism that exists today between US financial accounting and rest of the world financial accounting, then this is the time to establish that. And it's not a coincidence, Emily, that IOSCO, which brings together the world's regulators, IFRS F, which is responsible for financial accounting outside of the United States, and several other bodies are focusing on this issue of impact transparency. Without that impact transparency, greenwashing, general impact washing is going to be rife. And we run the risk of discrediting this whole effort to change our system so that companies and investors are able to bring solutions alongside government, rather than, in their pursuit of profit, creating problems which governments have to tax us all in order to try to solve them. Now, this revolution, which I call the impact revolution, has already started to change financial markets. If you look at sustainable bonds, they're already a $1.5 trillion pool. Many of them are becoming pay for success. There was a recent NL $4 billion bond issue where the rate of interest depends on achieving certain environmental targets. Novartis issued a 1.8 billion euro bond where its rate of interest falls if its drugs reach vulnerable populations. Pay for success, the optimization of risk, return and impact, is what is going to characterize the new shape of capitalism. It has deep implications for civil society. For the first time, pay for success enables non-profit organizations to raise capital as a business does. If a non-profit can show that it can deliver real results in homelessness, or in dropout rates from school, or improved attainment levels in education, in preventing pre-diabetics from becoming diabetics, a whole host of social issues, then we have the ability to attract very significant amounts of capital, because you're talking here of an uncorrelated asset class where your return depends on the social improvement, and where your returns can be between 5 and 10% a year. I'm thinking of the area of pay for success, such as we've discussed, but also of social and development impact bonds. So a revolution is going to take place in philanthropy. We're also seeing foundations now beginning to align their endowments with their mission. Up until very recently, until the Fourth Foundation, just 4 years ago, I think, decided to allocate $1 billion out of its endowment to impact, which includes ESG in their case, then everybody, and I sat on the boards of major endowments, everybody defended ferociously the ability to make money however you want with 95% of your capital, and then spending 5% to try to remedy some of the harm you've created, right? So civil society has the opportunity now, and I think we're going to see social entrepreneurs seizing it, to really begin to use these new sources of financing effectively. Now, with regard to the venture capital and private equity industry, as Larry, I think, mentioned, we started out measuring the impact of investments in the private asset classes, in private equity and venture capital. Bridges, which I was involved in co-founding in 2002, sought to do that. it was easier. The companies were smaller, they were single product companies. You didn't have to cope with the complexity of a Nestle or a Unilever or a Procter and Gamble. But the private equity industry is still in the early stage of understanding this. You see some of the top names, including my own firm, Apex, launching impact funds. But if you speak to those who are launching them, you'll see that they believe that that's the beacon to the future, that just within this decade, all their funds are going to be optimizing risk-return impact, because very simply put, it's a better way of delivering returns and of doing business. You have to be out of your mind today to invest in a company that is polluting very heavily, right? You know that it's likely to get regulated or taxed and that it'll find it difficult to attract talent. So it's already beginning, and you see the price of ExxonMobil falling by 2/3 over 3 years, and you see the price of Tesla multiplying 3 times over 1 year. So the weight of money going into new disruptive technologies that use new business models to improve the world while delivering profit is what is going to drive this to become the mainstream, the new normal. But we can't do it if government isn't bold enough, as the Roosevelt administration was in 1933 and 34, in saying, look, the age of impact transparency is here. It's a human right to know what damage or what good a company is delivering. And investors have to have the same price-sensitive information, which impact information has become, at the same time, prepared on the same basis. So if all of us participating in this discussion today can push for this, we have an opportunity with the G7, with the G20, and with COP26, which Larry mentioned. We have an opportunity to drive it through.
Thank you. I want to bring this back now, though, to the reality in Spain. So in the few minutes that we have left, I have a final question for you each, which is that Spain has been particularly hard hit post-pandemic with the hospitality and the tourism sector. We heard about the social inequality challenges that are feeling particularly acute here. So I wanted to understand, and I will come back to you actually, Ronnie, first, and thank you others for waiting patiently, that to understand really the role of the Spain NAB, the National Advisory Board, as well as the Global Steering Group in supporting, now as part of your strategy to support the recovery from the pandemic here in Spain.
So the Global Steering Group took over from the G8 Task Force in 2015, the Task Force on Impact Investment, which I was honored to chair. We're now active in 34 countries across the world, including 15 out of, if you count the EU, out of the G20 and all the G7 countries. I have been involved in Spain in the establishment of our NAB, which La Caixa has played a big role in supporting and in helping to drive forward. I find Spain is very receptive to this type of thinking. And I believe there's a real opportunity in the recovery to use the tools of impact investing. They can be government bonds, they can be corporate bonds, which are pay for success and aim to achieve an improvement, which could be youth unemployment or the re-employment of elderly people who lost their jobs as companies slimmed down through COVID. They can have to do with homelessness, which is going to be a recurring problem as poverty and unemployment increase. They can address educational issues. Many countries will have taken a step back during this crisis in terms of the education of their children, and emerging markets face a massive challenge. And we have to make education a priority for emerging market investment, which is similar to health. If there are 600 or 800 million kids who are not learning in and out of school today, that's a massive problem for the future. And so I think we can use, and I think La Caixa is able to lead this effort in Spain. We can use these tools and issue securities that bring capital from the private markets alongside government to address government's priorities and make this recovery fairer and create a more sustainable world.
So I'd like to come to you, Gonzalo, now about what CaixaBank's offer in its newly dominant position in Spain. What is the offer to Spain's post-COVID impact economy?
Well, thank you. Obviously, we have now a very large size, approximately 25% of the market. So whatever is good for Spain is going to benefit us, and we are genuinely interested in helping out the country coming out of this pandemic. Obviously, we've done it in the past, particularly through the provision of liquidity, which has been another example of good public-private cooperation. And last year, I was ready to continue on that front. I think it's very important for us, with this very large market share now, to be realistic and as a bank, make sure, and as a financial services provider, make sure we cater for the needs of everyone. In today's world of negative rates in the Eurozone, catering for the sort of small depositor of funds is not particularly profitable, but we actually have to provide a key social role here. So we have decided not to leave those locations where we're present. There's 365 small towns in Spain in which we're the sole bank, and we have made a commitment in the past, and we have renewed that commitment for the future to stay. We'll have to do that on a competitive basis, but we're not going to let towns fall into financial exclusion. We have over 150,000 social accounts, precisely catering for people that have less than 600 euros income, so making them provision of basically commission-free financial services. And I'd like to highlight two other things. One is what we're doing through our microfinance subsidiary, Microbank, where we have made over the past year approximately 1 million microcredits of 5,000, 6,000 euros each, so fairly small. The impact it has had, as measured by a third party, is over 200,000 of jobs created thanks to that. So moving in that direction, as Ronnie was saying, and it's also allowing us to fund ourselves in the markets. Over the last year and a half, we've raised 100% of our funding in the capital markets through either green or social bonds. We've actually done 6 billion euros now on green and social bonds. We actually have the collateral and the activity to generate new lending to sort of the right part of the economy and the right part of society to help on that front. So we're going to be very keen in supporting the economy and certainly doing our best. We'll make mistakes from time to time. We're not perfect, but certainly the intent is to be very active, and we are reasonably optimistic that Spain actually is going to come into a period of a strong recovery over the next year and a half.
Wonderful. Thank you. So my final question to you, Larry. What are the specific actions that BlackRock will be taking in your contribution? You mentioned very heavily the intermediary role that you play and that delicate dance to be played. So what specific actions can you take as BlackRock to contribute to a just and inclusive economy?
Well, I would say we've been consistent in our 32 years of being a firm of focusing on long-termism. We are not shy in having a voice for long-termism and a voice of our clients. I would say too many business leaders don't want a voice, and they're not speaking up. I believe by having a loud voice on stakeholder capitalism, focusing on our employees, making sure we are focusing on all our clients, making sure we are local in every community we ever work. We're Spanish in Spain, we're Mexican in Mexico, we're American in America, we're Japanese in Japan, making sure we connect in every society where we work and provide a social difference. That is our responsibility and our role. 2/3 of the assets we manage are retirement assets. So we manage approximately $6 trillion of retirement assets. That's a huge responsibility. And retirement is not about the tick-tock of the day. Markets go up and down. It's not about the moment. It is a long journey. It's a 30-plus year journey for people now, especially with longevity. And this is what we are trying to have a voice about this and try to build this. And we're now incorporating things like sustainability in this long-term journey. We're spending a great deal of time in the United States related to social issues and DEI issues of more diversity and inclusion and equity for more people. We have an enormous role and responsibility, and we have to earn it every day. And so that's have been our commitment to our society where we work. That is a commitment to all our employees, making sure that they believe in that. But it is a resounding commitment to all our clients. And our voice is heard from our clients by evidence of we're winning more share of wallet worldwide with our clients. That doesn't mean I don't have detractors. I have, every day we have somebody yelling at us, whether it's, the far right on some issue or the far left on another issue. And so we're not, and we're not perfect, as I said earlier today, but having a voice that resonates in our communities where we work, having a voice that resonates with our clients, gives us a profound ability to help shape the financial capital markets of the world. And that is our commitment to making sure that we are a voice of our long-term investors, that we are focusing with their needs as a fiduciary over a long journey, and through that is having a conversation and a voice with all the companies who we manage, who we own their equity on behalf of these asset owners. And we take that responsibility every moment of the day, and that's my commitment going forward, that we will continue to be that voice of investors, a voice of long-termism. Diversity and inclusion is a part of that. Environmental issues are part of that. And we have to play that role, and we have to move capitalism forward. And this is why I'm very constructive on capitalism. We are evolving. We may be slow at times, but we're evolving, we're changing. And I would say right now, public companies are moving faster than many parts of society, because society is not asking the same questions to so many other parts of society. And that, that's going to lead to not achieving our objective of a net zero world. And so, but back to what our job is every moment, is to serve these long-term savers, making sure that their financial futures are strong and that they can live in retirement with dignity. And that is the big crisis in the world that we don't talk about enough. There are too many individuals in even very strong developed countries that don't have enough retirement to live in retirement in dignity. And so, these are just big responsibilities, and and we take it very seriously.
Thank you. So many challenges, but also many opportunities we've heard as part of this conversation. Vive l'impact révolution, I think we're hearing from Ronnie. Let's hope, he's hoping indeed, that the financial industry can move just as fast, if not faster, than public companies in the acceleration of the change that is required, so that we're all fit for the future that lies ahead. But thank you very much, gentlemen, for your contributions today, and looking forward very much to seeing those visions become reality. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hope we're good on time still. Thank you very much for staying with us there through the challenges.
It worked out very well in the end. Thank you.
Yeah, it did. Thank you, everyone. I'm late to my next meeting, but that's okay. I enjoyed this.
Thank you, Larry. I realise,
Thank you.
we're a little over, so thank you for staying on.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.